There are moments in a human life when the pillars of reason begin to tremble, when the outer world, once bright and filled with meaning, suddenly dims, when the only remaining light flickers not from the heavens above, but from deep within, an ancient fire, red and raw, burning in the secret chambers of the soul. In 1913, a man stood at this precipice. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, heir to Freud's psychological empire, and one of the most celebrated minds of his time, chose to abandon everything that had made him respectable, not from madness, but out of a deeper loyalty, a loyalty to the soul itself. Jung turned his back on conventional science, the way a castaway leaves dry land, not because he despises it, but because he hears a call from beyond the visible shores. For years, he surrendered to what he would later call active imagination, a method of deliberately entering a state between waking and dreaming, allowing images, voices, and visions to arise from the unconscious, and engaging with them consciously. This wasn't schizophrenia. This wasn't psychosis. It was a voluntary descent into the underworld of the psyche. What he brought back from those depths would not fit neatly into scientific papers or tidy lectures. It would emerge as a heavy tome, bound in blood-red leather, filled with his own careful calligraphy and haunting illustrations, a book he kept hidden from the world until after his death. This was the Red Book, not a work of theory, not a treatise on psychology, but an initiation, a gospel, not according to reason, but according to the soul. At the time, Carl Jung was at the pinnacle of worldly success, director of the prestigious Bergholzli Clinic, Freud's chosen successor, a brilliant lecturer celebrated across Europe. His ego, his reputation, his identity, all finely dressed, perfectly constructed, yet something began to crack. Strange dreams haunted his nights, visions of blood-red seas swallowing cities whole, towers collapsing, nameless deaths in silent streets. At first, Jung observed these dreams dispassionately, the way a scientist should. He took notes. He waited for the phenomena to pass. But it didn't. It was 1913, and though the world remained oblivious, Europe stood on the brink of the First World War. Jung felt it in his bones, the collapse coming, not as political analysis, but as a visceral knowing, a prophetic ache in the soul. This vision, this burden, came at a high cost. He later described it as being dragged to the bottom of the sea by an invisible god. The rupture with Freud was not merely philosophical, it was symbolic. Jung was severing himself from the old mechanistic view of the human mind. No longer did he seek to fix the soul. He sought instead to listen to it, to follow it, to be led by it, even if it meant plunging into darkness. Thus began his true descent, what the mystics called the dark night of the soul, and from this terrible darkness a new light would eventually emerge. The darkness Jung encountered was no mere depression. It was deeper, a dissolution of identity itself, an inner shipwreck, an annihilation necessary for something more authentic to be born. It was during these agonizing years that Jung discovered the practice of active imagination, a method halfway between dreaming and meditation, where images arose freely and he interacted with them, as one might in a vivid dream, yet all while awake. He didn't invent stories. He didn't fabricate characters. He simply recorded what came, like a scribe taking dictation from another realm. Hours would pass with Jung sitting in his study, pen racing across pages, recording conversations with figures that surfaced from the unconscious. These were not vague symbols. They were entities, each with a distinct voice, personality, and presence. There was Elijah, the ancient prophet, Salome, the dark biblical dancer, a laughing demon, a golden child, a serpent deity, even disembodied voices speaking from the void. Jung engaged each one with respect and caution. He doubted his own sanity. He feared he might be losing his mind. But something deeper reassured him. This was not illness. This was initiation. As ancient wisdom teaches, he who descends into hell returns with fire in his eyes. In that crucible of visions, Carl Jung, the doctor, the academic, the respected man, had died, and in his place was born the initiate, the seeker, the alchemist of the soul. No longer chasing accolades or intellectual mastery, Jung committed to what the ancient mystics called opus magnum, the great work of inner transformation. There were no guarantees, no clear roadmaps, only the blank pages before him and the courage to get lost. My life, he would later write, is the story of the self-realization of the unconscious. Thus the Red Book began to take form that page after page, word after word, image after image, each one a ritual, each one an offering. And what Jung embarked upon, unbeknownst to him at first, was a process far older than modern psychology, a pattern recognizable in the lives of shamans, prophets, saints, the shattering of the old self, the birth of a deeper, unified consciousness. As Jung ventured deeper into the dreamscapes of the soul, a figure emerged from the visionary chaos, a figure who would change everything. Philemon. Philemon appeared not as an idea, not as a literary character, but as a living presence, an old man with a long white beard, clothed in a blue robe, his wings shimmering like those of a kingfisher. He spoke to Jung, not as a figment of imagination, but as an autonomous being, a distinct consciousness within the psyche. By this time, Jung had spent years immersed in the study of myths, religions, alchemy, and the world's mystical traditions. He understood the universal symbol of the wise old man, a guide figure present across every culture and era. In Taoism, he is the inner Lao Tzu. In Christian mysticism, the divine Logos. In the Kabbalah, the hidden elder. Philemon was Jung's own living embodiment of this archetype. He was not an invention. He was a revelation. Jung later explained, Philemon conveyed thoughts to me I had never had before. I knew I was dealing with something more than myself, yet somehow still within me. Philemon became Jung's spiritual mentor during this phase, teaching him that true wisdom does not belong to the ego, that the greatest insights are not conquered but received. In the ancient traditions, the inner teacher appears only after the ego surrenders, only after the initiate accepts the collapse of certainty. Philemon guided Jung through the dark labyrinth of individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the psyche into a coherent whole. He became the bridge between Jung's fragmented self and the deeper self, the eternal center within, and it was through this dialogue that Jung's greatest ideas began to take shape. The collective unconscious, archetypes, the transcendent function, synchronicity, all of it flowed from the conversations and lessons of Philemon. This was no intellectual exercise. This was lived gnosis. Jung even wrote letters to Philemon, a man exchanging correspondence with the spirit of his own soul. The Red Book captures this radical honesty. It is not the diary of a madman. It is the map of a soul's initiation. But no true initiation comes without facing the monstrous. Jung's descent was not all wise dialogues and shimmering mandalas. He was plunged again and again into the realm of the shadow. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is everything the conscious ego refuses to see. Repressed desires, fears, shameful instincts, destructive impulses, but also hidden talents, suppressed passions, and buried strengths. The shadow is not evil, it is exiled truth, and Jung confronted it in its rawest, most terrifying forms. Demonic figures taunted him. Serpents whispered secrets. Devils offered him power. Visions of death, madness, and disintegration unfolded before his mind's eye. These were not metaphors. They were lived experiences. Yet Jung remained conscious throughout, documenting, observing, dialoguing. He realized he was not facing personal madness, but the collective darkness of the human species. The parts of ourselves civilization teaches us to deny. Everything that remains unconscious will be lived out as fate, Jung later wrote. By facing the shadow without fleeing, he found its paradoxical secret. The shadow guards the gateway to the self. The ancient alchemists knew this truth. The first stage of the great work is nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the death before the rebirth. Modern spirituality often promises only light, healing, positivity. But Jung understood. Real transformation demands first embracing the chaos, and from that ruin, a deeper wholeness is born. By 1930, Jung completed writing the Red Book, not because his inner journey had ended, but because he understood. The book was only a portal, a gateway to a new way of living, thinking, being. He emerged from the abyss not as a broken man, but as a new kind of soul, one who saw reality as living symbol. The Red Book is not a psychological manual. It is a ritual artifact, almost 200 pages of thick parchment, meticulously handwritten, adorned with mandalas, labyrinths, serpents' suns, crosses, all drawn from the deepest collective memory of humanity. Jung knew. The world was not ready. This book was not for mass consumption. It was for those few willing to undertake their own inner pilgrimage. In the Red Book's final sections, the 7 Sermons to the Dead, Jung speaks not as himself, but through the voice of Basilides, a 2nd-century Gnostic mystic. Here he channels visions of the pleroma, the divine fullness, and describes gods who unify opposites, light and dark, good and evil, creation and destruction. The sermons are dense, symbolic, alien to the rational mind, but to the soul they speak in a familiar tongue. After the Red Book, Jung spent decades developing his theories. Individuation, archetypes, synchronicity, all flowing from the spiritual soil he had tilled through this visionary work. He studied alchemy, realizing that the ancient philosopher's stone was never literal gold. It was the integration of the human soul. He bridged mysticism and science like no one before him. Salvation, Jung said, is in the mud. The pearl is born in the sludge. And so, for those brave enough to face the trembling of reason, to endure the shipwreck of the self, to listen to the soul's ancestral fire, the Red Book still whispers its living secrets, not as a book to be read, but as a journey to be lived.